Good evening, everybody. My name is Tandi Sypolt, and Sue via Cindy asked me to speak this evening. So I hope whatever I say might something might resonate with somebody, or you'll get to know me a little bit better. So some people might know some things, and so I hope it's not too redundant. But anyway, I was born and raised in South Africa. So that would have been I was born in the 70s, grew up mostly 80s, and then left in 1996. I immigrated to United States. So just that's the time that I grew up. So my right from the start, my biggest gift that God gave me was my grandmother. She was my father's mother, and we lived like one street over from her. And when I was born, I was the first grandchild. She was still like 45 or 46, so she was young and always wanted a little girl. So when I came along, she decided she's just going to take me. I'm her daughter. And so that's how I grew up. We were very close. It was more like a mother daughter relationship. And so the reason I mention that is because she's the one that basically introduced me to God and who was my faith champion through the years. So my parents were a unique couple. The two people that never should have gotten married or had children, but there you are. So here I am. And so my grandmother belonged to the Dutch Reformed Church, which is like the biggest denomination in South Africa, and it's Afrikaans people, which is what I speak as well. We're from the Dutch, so it sounds a lot like Dutch. And so that was where they christen babies. So she wanted me christened, and in those days, the church, both parents had to be from that denomination for them to go up and christen you. And my mom wasn't. She was an English South African, so she didn't belong to that church. And my dad, definitely not in the 70s. Men don't stand up at the church by themselves. So they said that, he could christen me, but he's not going to do that. So my grandparents christened me. So my grandmother was the one who stood up there and promised to raise me, in the faith. So, um, so just, that's the background a little bit. And then when I was 6 years old, I think, my dad got a job 8 hours away. So we moved, which was very traumatic for me. I hated that. I wanted to be close to my grandmother. So we moved. Was able to spend most school holiday vacations and stuff like that with my grandmother, which I was very grateful for. But it was difficult growing up without her because we were very close. I was also the only one that went to church in my immediate little nuclear family. My parents didn't go to church. My dad grew up going to church and catechism and all that, but he had a bad experience, I guess, when he was 17 or something, and then didn't want anything to do with God or church or anything like that. So from the age of 7, really, I would walk to church by myself. It was about a mile and a half, 2 miles away, and I would go to church and Sunday school. So that was a Sunday, regular Protestant denomination. And so I would just go by myself. I'd walk there, go to church, go to Sunday school, walk back. And I did that every Sunday. And it was interesting to me because if my dad was very adamant about God and church, we weren't allowed to talk about it. And he didn't want to hear anything, but he never told me that I couldn't go, which later, when I was an adult, I realized was God. It was God working that allowed me to keep going. So that was and then of course it was the Dutch Reformed Church. So we have catechism, and you have to go to Sunday school, and you write exams, and And then you get confirmed into the church when you're in your last year of high school. So that would have been the 12th grade. And so that was actually so for all those years I just went by myself, and then when I visited my grandmother we would go to church and stuff like that. And actually the on my confirmation, so I was 16, was the first time my dad uh, put his foot back into a church, and he went just because I asked him to, and I wanted my parents there, and so he did. He came, but he my dad, and also I need to just say this too. My father was an alcoholic. He was a violent alcoholic, and so growing up in that environment is not always easy. And there were, even though went to church, there were times when I was a teenager where I would pray for my father to stop drinking and for the violence to stop. But of course it didn't. And so there were times when I felt like God was really far away, and maybe he left. But I see now that God didn't, because he brought people into my life that helped. And like I said, my grandmother was always there. And then one time my sister, who went to a boarding school, she was younger than I was, and she was it was like a school for troubled kids, and her roommate wanted to come to our town, which in the 80s was the headquarters for the Satanist movement or religion or whatever you call it. And so this girl wanted to come um, to attend that, the Satanists. And my mom didn't want her to come, and so she told my sister that if she couldn't come, and I think I was about 15 then, that they were going to kidnap me, the Satanists were, and then sacrifice me at their meeting. So to try and bribe her, for my mom, for letting her come. And apparently my mom was afraid, and she said, well, I can't go out the house on the weekend or anything like that in case they kidnap me. And I told my mom that my God was bigger than their Satan, and I'm protected. And just we went on my merry way. And apparently that made an impact on my mother, because years later, when I was an adult, we were talking about that, and she mentioned it and said that I was so confident in my faith, and that made an impression on her. And she was asking if she could go to church with me. And so I say that because just to mention that you never know when something you're going to say is going to make a difference. I mean, I was a teenager, I didn't really say that for effect or to, it was just, that's what I believed. I believed God protected me, and I wasn't going to give in to any kind of Satanists, threats, I guess. So anyway, so that was pretty much my upbringing. My father, um, because of the drinking, he didn't want, like, Sunday church on TV or anything. He didn't want to sit and drink in front of the TV when there was church on. And so his solution was to turn the TV off instead of stop drinking, which I thought was funny. But anyway, so that's was my growing up years, and I continued to go to church even though I had to do it by myself most of the time. And then in let's see, I was 23 in 1996, and that's when I decided to leave South Africa. The economy was doing badly. It was hard to find work. The crime had really escalated, and I just didn't want to live like that. And I knew that I needed to leave soon, because while it was still relatively easy, because as we know and seen, it got difficult. Most of most people on here don't really, I don't think you've really dealt with immigration, but that's not a very easy thing to do. And it's very expensive. It's very difficult. So anyway, so I was 23, decided I was going to leave. The only way I could do that was to be a living nanny. They call them au pairs, but that's basically what it is. You're a living nanny. So I signed up with an agency over in South Africa. And then what they do is you fill in all the paperwork. They send it over to the agency's liaison in the States. Families then look at it, and then they decide to contact you. And then if you match up and everybody likes everybody, then you go. So it was also in the time of the this is where I think God has such a sense of humor. He has a sense of humor with me, which I think he needs most of the time. But it was the time that of the Olympics in Atlanta, 1996, and we only have three channels, or at that time we only had three channels on the television, and everything was about the Olympics. And if it wasn't about the Olympics, then it was about Atlanta and what's going on. And I was so sick and tired of hearing about Atlanta. So when I filled out the forms and I was waiting for somebody to match, I said, okay, God, I will go to the United States, but I'm not going to Atlanta. And well, the family that I really liked and that liked me lived in Atlanta. So that's where I went. So I decided then and there, I'm not telling God anything ever again about what I'm not going to do. So anyway, so I spoke to the family for 15 minutes on the phone. May said, yes, I'll come. And a month later, I packed my two little suitcases and I came to United States. I didn't know anybody. I came alone. I'd never been out of the country. So yeah, that was quite an experience. If I think about it now, I didn't think it was a very brave thing to do at the time, but now I look back and I think, good Lord, that was so brave. I mean, completely alone, not knowing a soul. So yeah, but again, I felt, it was what God wanted me to do. And so with his protection and guidance, I did it. So that experience was, it's a whole book in itself, because there was some ups and downs and good and bad things that happened there. But one of the first things I did was I found a church, because I knew that going to church for me is very important, and you make friends, and that's the way you just it would be easier to. For me, I've always felt like as soon as I move to a town, the first thing I do is I find a library and a church, because those two things mean a lot to me. So yeah, that's what I did, and I went to all kinds of events, Bible studies. I was single, so I joined the singles group, and I enjoyed it. It was a good way to assimilate, get to know the culture, people, whatever. So, but yeah, so I came to Atlanta, where I said I didn't want to go. And I'm glad I did, because I was really, happy. And so after my 1 year as an au pair, because that's a specific visa that you get. And so you're supposed to go back after a year. But since I didn't want to do that, I was able to get a regular work visa. So, which meant I could just go do, regular work. And so that's what I did. And worked. And then eventually I moved to Dahlonega, Georgia, which is up in the North Georgia mountains. I don't know if you all know where that is, but it's an old gold rush town, and it's really pretty and cute and very touristy, which I don't like. But anyway, I moved up there and enjoyed it. Also joined a church. I actually started a singles group at the Methodist church there. And just was happy, worked, but I commuted I still worked down in Alpharetta, so it was a long commute every day, which drove me nuts. And as the traffic got worse, I would take me about an hour and 15 minutes one way. So I sat in traffic and drove for 2.5 hours a day, and I did that for 12 years. So I was tired of of the commute. But so by that time, my grandmother had passed away. So I had gone back to visit South Africa about every 2 years or so, but I would go visit my grandmother's mostly. And so she passed away. But she was 84, so she was sick, so it was expected. But then 3 weeks later, my mom passed away, and which was unexpected. And she died from her sixth stroke, which was, and she was only 58. She was young, and so it was just my dad. And then one day, so my dad still hadn't believed in God, and I'd been praying for him, and because I felt like he needed God, especially now that he was alone. And so one Father's Day, I went to church, and they actually started having services on the Methodist Church, started having services on a Saturday evening. And so I started going on Saturday evenings. And so even though it's interesting to me that I even back then felt like the Sabbath should have been on the Saturday, even though I didn't actually vocalize that, it's just, in my mind that was working. So anyway, it was a Father's Day. I went to church, and I was thinking about my father, and still, he hasn't found God. And then I was sitting in the service, and God said to me, well, you need to talk to your father and tell him that he needs to come to me. And I thought, no way, I'm not doing that. My dad's a scary guy, and I don't want him yelling at me over the phone. But he was sick at that time. He was ill. I think his liver was not working or something. And so I went home, and I thought, okay, I'm going to call him, because at least even if he yells, I could just, we're two continents away, so he can't hurt me. So I called him, and he was not doing well. He's on the phone, very ill. And he said to me, he says, why can't I die? Why am I not dying? And I told him what God told me to say. And I said, God won't let you die, because he doesn't give up on anybody, and you have to come to him. He's not going to have you be lost. And I thought, oh, here it comes. And I closed my eyes and wait for the yell. But he didn't yell. My father said, very softly, said, I know. And I was amazed. I mean, I didn't expect that. And of course, then I didn't know what to say, because that was not the reaction I expected. And so I just said, "Oh, so okay. What's the weather like?" I was completely confused. But anyway, so I worked it away. We talked a bit, and then I said, "Is there anything I can do for you to help? You go to church, find God, any aunt." And he said, "Well, if you don't mind, could you send me a Bible?" And I said, yes, I can, send you a Bible. I mean, I didn't expect my father ever saying that. That's the last words I thought he would say. And so I said, yes, I'll send you a Bible. And then when we hung up the phone, I thought, oh, goodness, how much is it going to cost to send a Bible? Because that's a lot of money. And I can just see God smacking his head, thinking, oh, she was so close. I had her. But anyway, so I told my landlady about it, and she didn't go to church, but she wanted to. She said, can I send him the Bible through Amazon and have it delivered?" And I was surprised, since she didn't go to church either. But I thought, okay. And so anyway, so that's how my dad, and then he got better, and he started attending a church in South Africa, which, if there's never another miracle in my life, to me that was a miracle, because I thought my father was one of those people that were just hopeless. They're just gonna perish without knowing God. So again, I mentioned that because I didn't want to say anything. I was afraid when God asked me to do that. I didn't. I'm nobody. I mean, I'm not an evangelist. I'm not a preacher. I'm not somebody with a lot of like knowledge or whatever. So I didn't want to be the one to do that. And yet God uses us. And if I didn't listen to what God said, then who knows? My father might have been lost. So I just share that because sometimes it's scary for us to do things that God wants us to do, but you know we have to. Other people, I feel people's lives depend on it sometimes. So anyway, so that was my, with him, and then I was going to the Methodist church still, but I was starting to feel like the churches were moving away from the Bible. The message was very like feel good. They were just saying things that people wanted to hear. And then the church got an ATM inside the church. So it wasn't in the sanctuary, it was in the foyer. And I thought, why are we putting a money machine in the church? I mean, I know people use debit cards all the time now, but to me, that didn't, I didn't feel right. And then I went to another church with a friend of mine, and it was a non-denominational church. And when they gave me earplugs at the door, I knew this was going to be not the church for me. And it was more like a rock concert. And so I was slowly trying to, find another church, some denomination where people were actually speaking the Bible, using the Bible, and not, emotional feel good things or rock music to attract people. So, so I was looking, and then I got my position opened up here in Chattanooga through my company I was working for, and I could get a transfer. And so I decided to do that, and that would be also a shorter commute for me. I could, I live closer to work, and I wanted to change. And so in 2013, I moved up here to Chattanooga, and I got a place to live, and I didn't want to commute again. So I worked at Blue Cross, Blue Shield. So we lived in Eastridge, and that's 15 minutes away. So I was happy, no more commute. So so yeah, and then I did all kinds of different work, and I liked that Chattanooga had. There was a lot of cultural events. There was a lot of church events. There was just a lot to do here, and I was really happy. And then I started attending a Methodist church here in Eastridge, but again, it wasn't. I still was very looking for something that was more biblical, and I actually started attending a Mennonite church in Athens, Tennessee. I found one, and the woman dressed the like the Amish whatever, but they were more modern. So they did have electricity, they did drive cars, but they didn't have television and stuff like that. But they were more of like a little bit more modern. And I started going to their church on Sundays. They still do Sunday. So, and I felt there was much more biblical based. They use the Bible. They don't, it's back to the way it should be. And then I even attended the Old Order Mennonite Church a couple of times at Delano. I don't know if y'all know the community there. They do the horse and buggies. Well, I attended their church, and that was even more biblical. And I really enjoy going there. It's not for everybody. It's their lifestyle is quite unique, but I loved it. I like going. I like the Bible based thing. And then I had I wanted to changed my health. And then I remembered that when I was in South Africa working, I was probably about 19. There was I worked for a sandblasting company, and we had an inspector from that would come in, and he was a Seventh Day Adventist. And so we talked a lot, and he even gave me this great recipe for mushroom burgers, which I wish I still had the recipe because it was so good. Um, and I remember one thing about, and he wouldn't work on Saturdays because he was an Adventist. And I thought that was just, amazing that he could stand up for his faith like that, and said he would, inspect the stuff, but not on a Saturday. And so I remembered his church. And so I started looking for Seventh Day Adventists around here. And then I found a dinner with the doctor, and that's how I started and going. And I just felt so at home from the first day. And I went by myself, as I do most things. um, and I remember Carol speaking to me, and Belinda, two of the first people that spoke to me. And I felt, at home. I felt everybody was just so welcoming. And you know the you teach the Bible, and the Sabbath, which is something that I always was wondering about. It's like, why are we not on Saturday? Why is it Sunday? So and here I am. So I've just it's a was a journey. In different things, but I've learned so much. And I was sharing, and I've got a wonderful, since I got baptized, I have a spiritual, I guess, mentor. I'm not sure what the right terminology is, but Cindy's been mine, and she's been wonderful. And I, she's just helped me so much. And I've been studying a lot, Ellen White's writings. Everything just makes sense to me. I think it's right. It sounds, I've not come across anything that Adventists believe that's strange or weird or not right. I just feel like I'm finally where I belong. And so, um, yeah, I enjoy coming here. My faith has grown since I've been at the church. So that pretty much in a nutshell. My life, has a lot of other things, but it's I can. My friend said you should write a book because with all, everything had a lot of twists and turns, but through it all, I can see God's hand. I can see how God has, every time I have an issue or a problem, God puts somebody in my life that helps or clarifies something. And I just want to say that it's not never a straight line. It's never just up up up. It's up and down. It's around the bend. But if we stay close to God, it's he never. I think this is something I've found, and I don't know if it's because I'm getting old now, or is that it's God didn't promise us no problems if once we believe in him. He just promised that he'll be there with us. And when I was younger, I wanted it to be just smooth sailing and no problems. And I thought that's what faith was. So if there was issues in my life, it meant God didn't care or wasn't there. Now I know that's not true. I still live on earth with all its sin and problems, and God, he promised to be there and help. And as long as I stay close to him, and not he doesn't move away, it's we move away. And that's, so it's made me feel much more um stronger, I think, in my faith as well. I'm not a preacher. I don't, some of y'all pray the most wonderful prayers. I can't do that. And I'm not, I'm not a preacher. I don't, know that much, but I I just, what I do know is God, loves me. And that's one thing I finally um, realized when I was growing up. With the when you grow up in an alcoholic house, you have emotion there's emotional issues, and so I never had high self-esteem. I never felt like I was good enough or mattered, um, until recently when I've been reading a lot of Ellen White's writings, and specifically on health and nutrition and that stuff. And one of the things she wrote, which finally clicked for me, was that we that God, we're not our own, that our bodies, our beings belong to God, and twice. One is because He made us. So if you make something, it's that thing belongs to you. And also Jesus bought us very dearly. And when you um, pay for something a high price, like Jesus did with His life, it's normally something that's of great value. And that just clicked for me. And I was like, well, if Jesus died for me for something that's a high value, then I do have value. And so, and that has lifted a big burden off my shoulders, something that's weighed me down for a very long time. So it's, so I want to just say, if anybody's in a position where they're struggling with something, just keep keep reading, keep learning, keep going to Bible study, keep praying. It just, don't give up, and it will eventually, you'll find the answer. So anyway, that's my story.